Have you ever witnessed a moment so charged with injustice that the silence that followed was louder than any argument? A moment where a person's entire identity is challenged based on nothing more than the color of their skin. This is the story of Captain Elias Vance, a distinguished airline pilot with a flawless record who was publicly humiliated at the gate of his own flight. He was told by another captain, a man who saw him not as a colleague, but as an intruder, "This isn't your flight." What that captain didn't know was that Elias wasn't just holding a first-class ticket. He was holding the very credentials that gave them both the right to sit in the cockpit. The confrontation lasted only a minute, but the fallout would change both of their lives and an entire airline forever. The air in the house was still imbued with the quiet hum of a sleeping home. Outside, the first hints of dawn painted the Long Island sky in hues of soft grey and lavender. Inside, Captain Elias Vance moved with the practiced economy of a man accustomed to early starts and meticulous routines. His pilot's uniform, a crisp navy blue blazer with 4 gold stripes on the cuffs, and a matching cap with the silver wings of Global Wings Air hung pristinely on a valet stand. Today, however, it would remain there. Today he was not Captain Vance, commander of a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. He was just Elias, a son, flying to see his parents for their 50th wedding anniversary. He cinched the knot on a pair of dark grey trousers, the fabric a fine wool that spoke of quiet success. He paired them with a simple, high-quality black cashmere sweater. On his wrist, a classic IWC pilot's watch, a gift from his wife Aliyah after he made captain. It was a beautiful functional piece of engineering, much like the aircraft he flew. He looked at his reflection, a tall, well-built black man in his early 40s, his hair cut short. His expression usually one of calm authority. This morning it was softened by anticipation. Denver. He could already taste his mother's peach cobbler and hear his father's booming laugh. "You're going to wake the whole neighborhood with all that quiet," a voice murmured from the bedroom doorway. Aliyah leaned against the frame, a silk robe wrapped around her. She was a pediatric surgeon, and her hands, which performed miracles on the tiniest of hearts, held a steaming mug of coffee. She crossed the room and handed it to him. "My stealth skills are legendary." Elias smiled, taking a sip. "Black coffee just the way I like it. You're a mind reader." "I'm a wife," she corrected gently, her fingers tracing the silver wings on his uniform cap. "It's part of the job description. Are you sure you don't want to wear this?" "You get better service." He chuckled a low, warm sound. "And I'd have to answer a dozen questions about why I'm in the cabin and not the cockpit. No, today I get to be pampered. Seat 2A, I plan on having a ginger ale, watching a terrible movie, and falling asleep before we even hit cruising altitude." "Sounds like a dream," she said, her eyes scanning his face. She knew the weight he carried with his profession, the immense responsibility, the constant training, the nights away from home. She also knew the other unspoken weight, the subtle slights, the surprised looks when he introduced himself as the captain, the quiet, persistent pressure of being a black man in a field still overwhelmingly white. He never complained, but she saw it in the slight tightening of his jaw, the careful way he always maintained an impeccable, unassailable professionalism. "It is," he agreed, pulling her into a gentle embrace. He breathed in the familiar scent of her hair. "I'll call you the moment I land. Give the kids a kiss for me when they wake up." "I will." "Tell your parents congratulations. 50 years. They're an inspiration. They're a force of nature," he said, laughing. An hour later, his car service was gliding through the pre-dawn traffic towards John F. Kennedy International Airport. The sprawling complex was already a hive of activity, a microcosm of the world buzzing with purpose and anxiety. Elias navigated the terminal with an innate ease, the familiar rhythm of travel, a comfort to him. He checked his single bag, breezed through the TSA pre-check line, and made his way to the Global Wings Sky Lounge. Inside the lounge, the atmosphere was a curated bubble of tranquility. The scent of coffee and pastries mingled with the quiet clatter of keyboards and the murmur of hushed conversations. He found a seat by the large windows, overlooking the tarmac, where the hulking shapes of jets were being attended to by ground crews under the bright floodlights. He watched a 777 being pushed back from its gate, its massive engines whining to life. For Elias, it was a beautiful ballet of logistics and power. He felt a familiar pull, a sense of belonging. This was his world. The sky was his office. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through family photos, his smile genuine. There were his 2 kids, Maya and Noah, at the beach, their faces bright with joy. There was Leia, stunning in a red dress at a hospital gala. There were his parents standing on their porch in Denver, arm in arm, their faces etched with the love of a lifetime. This was why he did it. The long hours, the time zones, the pressure, it was all for them. At 7:45 a.m., the boarding announcement for Flight 1128 to Denver echoed softly through the lounge. He finished his coffee, tucked his phone away, and slung his leather messenger bag over his shoulder. He felt a light, pleasant hum of anticipation. He was just another passenger today, anonymous and free. He walked out of the lounge and toward gate B42, completely unaware that his anonymity was about to be violently stripped away, and his world, which he had so carefully built on skill and merit, was about to be shaken to its very foundation. He was about to meet a man who saw the world not as it was, but as his own prejudices had shaped it. And for that man, a black man in a cashmere sweater had no place in the front of the plane. Gate B42 was a controlled chaos of weary travelers and anxious families. The digital screen above the desk glowed with the flight information: GW 1128, Denver, on time. Elias noted the aircraft type, a Boeing 737-900R, with a pilot's casual interest. He knew the plane well, having flown it dozens of times before his promotion to the wide-body 787 fleet. Isabel Rossi, the gate agent, spoke into the microphone with a practiced, slightly strained cheerfulness. "We would now like to begin boarding Global Wings Flight 1128 with service to Denver. We invite our active duty military personnel and families traveling with small children to board at this time." A small group shuffled forward. Elias stood back, respecting the process. He watched the scene, the familiar airport tableau. A young mother struggling with a stroller and a crying toddler. A fresh-faced Marine in his dress blues, looking barely old enough to vote. The everyday human drama of travel. Standing near the edge of the agent's desk, observing the proceedings with an air of proprietary oversight, was a man in his late 50s. He was tall and lean, with a full head of silver hair and a deeply tanned, weathered face that spoke of countless hours above the clouds. He wore the same Global Wings uniform as the one hanging in Elias's closet, but his 4 stripes seemed to carry an extra self-important weight. This was Captain Richard Sterling. Sterling was what the industry called an old guard pilot. He'd started flying when cockpits were still dominated by gruff ex-military types, and flight attendants were called stewardesses. He believed in a rigid hierarchy in seniority and in the right look for a pilot. To him, the flight deck was a sanctuary, and he was its gatekeeper. He was commanding this flight to Denver, and as was his habit, he liked to watch the boarding process, mentally sizing up the passengers who would be under his care for the next 4 hours. His eyes scanned the growing line for Zone 1 boarding, business travelers in suits, a well-to-do older couple. Then his gaze landed on Elias. He saw a black man, dressed in expensive but casual clothes, standing confidently in the priority lane. Sterling's mind, a product of decades of unchallenged biases, processed this information through a distorted filter. He didn't see a fellow professional or a successful man. He saw an anomaly. He saw someone who didn't fit his narrow, preconceived notion of who belonged in first class. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. He'd seen it before, in his opinion. People trying to board with the wrong group, hoping to sneak on early. It offended his sense of order. We now invite our first class and global wings Diamond Medallion members to board. Please have your boarding passes ready, Isabel announced. The Zone 1 line moved forward. Elias stepped with it, pulling his digital boarding pass up on his phone. As he reached the front of the line, just as Isabel was about to scan his phone, Captain Sterling took a deliberate step forward, physically blocking Elias's path. He held up a hand, a gesture of absolute authority. "Excuse me, sir," Sterling said. His voice was not overtly aggressive, but it was laden with a condescending authority that instantly drew the attention of everyone nearby. The hum of the gate area quieted. "I think you're mistaken." Elias paused, his hand holding his phone steady. He looked at the pilot, then at the Zone 1 sign, then back at the pilot. He was momentarily confused. "I'm sorry. This is the first-class boarding line," Sterling stated slowly, as if speaking to a child or someone who didn't understand English. "Economy boarding hasn't started yet. You'll need to step aside and wait for your zone to be called." The words hung in the air, thick and charged. It wasn't a question. It was a command, a public dismissal. Elias felt a hot flush of anger rise in his chest, but years of training and a lifetime of experience in navigating such moments took over. He kept his expression neutral, his voice steady. The pilot inside him, the one responsible for 300 souls at a time, demanded calm. "I believe I'm in the correct line," Elias said, his tone polite but firm. He extended his phone toward the gate agent. "I'm in seat 2A. Isabel Rossi looked trapped. Her eyes darted from Elias's phone screen, which clearly displayed his first-class seat, to her own captain's stern face. She was a young agent caught between customer service protocol and the unwritten rule of never ever contradicting the flight's commander in public. Sterling didn't even glance at the phone. His focus was entirely on Elias. The condescension in his voice sharpened into undisguised suspicion. "Things can get confusing at a busy airport. Why don't you let me see your boarding pass?" It was a direct challenge to his integrity, wrapped in the thinnest veil of feigned helpfulness. Behind them, the other first-class passengers were shuffling awkwardly. A man in a business suit cleared his throat. A woman pretended to be engrossed in her phone, but her camera was angled just so. The entire gate area had become a silent theater, and Elias was its unwilling star. "That won't be necessary," Elias said, his voice dropping slightly, losing its warmth and gaining a core of steel. "I'm perfectly aware of my seat assignment and the boarding process. If you'll excuse me, I'd like to board the plane." He made to step around Sterling toward the scanner, but Sterling shifted his body once again, blocking the way. The pilot's jaw was tight. His prejudice was now overriding his professional judgment. In his mind, he was maintaining order. He was preventing someone from breaking the rules, from getting something they weren't entitled to. "Sir, I'm the captain of this aircraft," Sterling said, his voice rising in volume, ensuring everyone could hear. "And I'm telling you this isn't your flight. Now step aside before you cause a scene and delay the departure." The accusation was now explicit. Not just a mistake, but a deliberate attempt to deceive. A scene. The humiliation was complete. Elias stood there under the harsh fluorescent lights of Gate B42, branded an imposter in front of a crowd of strangers. He looked at the silver-haired captain, at the 4 gold stripes on his sleeves, symbols of a shared profession now being used as a weapon against him. He took a slow, deep breath, the anger inside him solidifying not into rage, but into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. This would not stand. The silence at the gate was now heavy, almost suffocating. Every eye was fixed on the 2 men locked in a silent standoff. Isabel Rossi, the gate agent, looked pale, her hand frozen over the scanner. In the background, First Officer Ben Carter Sterling's co-pilot had emerged from the jet bridge to see what the delay was. He was a man in his early 30s, sharp and observant, and he instantly recognized the dangerous territory his captain was treading. He stopped short, his expression a mixture of disbelief and alarm. Captain Sterling crossed his arms, a smug, unyielding look on his face. He believed he had won. He had asserted his authority and exposed a would-be freeloader. He expected the man before him to shrink away, to mumble an apology, and retreat to the back of the economy line, where in Sterling's mind he belonged. He profoundly misjudged Elias Vance. Elias did not shrink. He did not raise his voice. He did not cause the scene Sterling had accused him of wanting to create. Instead, he met the captain's arrogant gaze with an unnerving calm. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered the hand holding his phone. With his other hand, he reached into the interior pocket of his messenger bag. The movement was fluid and economical, betraying no agitation. Sterling's eyes narrowed slightly, perhaps expecting the man to produce a crumpled, incorrect ticket. Other passengers leaned forward, their curiosity piqued. The woman who had been discreetly filming angled her phone for a better shot. Elias's hand emerged from the bag holding a slim black leather wallet. It was not a consumer wallet, but a professional credential case. He flipped it open. Inside, behind clear plastic windows, were 2 IDs. He did not present them to the gate agent. He held the wallet up directly in front of Captain Richard Sterling, positioning it just inches from the man's face. His voice when he spoke was quiet, yet it carried across the silent gate area with absolute clarity. "I am Captain Elias Vance," he said, his tone devoid of any emotion except for a chilling precision. "My employee number is 775-219. I fly the 787 on the JFK to London Heathrow route." He paused, letting the words sink in. He tapped a finger on the first ID. It was his Global Wings Air Crew identification card. It featured his photograph in full uniform, smiling professionally, his name, and the unmistakable title, Captain. "And this," Elias continued, his finger moving to the second, more official-looking card, "is my airline transport pilot license, issued by the Federal Aviation Administration. It certifies me to operate the aircraft you are about to fly, and several much larger ones." The world seemed to lurch to a halt. Captain Sterling froze. His entire body went rigid. His smug expression dissolved, replaced by a slack-jawed mask of pure, unadulterated shock. His eyes, wide and unblinking, stared at the credentials. He saw the official Global Wings logo. He saw the FAA seal. He saw the word Captain printed in bold letters next to the face of the man he had just publicly accused of being a fraud. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a pasty, mottled grey. The air crackled with the force of his realization. This wasn't just some passenger. This was a colleague, a senior colleague based on his fleet assignment, a brother in the fraternity of pilots, a man who had earned the same 4 stripes that Sterling wore with such arrogant pride. And he had just humiliated him in front of his crew and his passengers, based on nothing more than a poisonous, deeply ingrained prejudice. First Officer Ben Carter, standing by the jet bridge door, let out a low, involuntary groan. He put a hand to his forehead, seeing the entire flight, and possibly his captain's career, spiraling into a black hole. Isabel Ross's eyes were wide as saucers. She looked from the ID to Sterling's horrified face, and back again. Elias held the wallet steady for another 5 seconds, ensuring the full weight of the moment was absorbed. He had made no threats. He had issued no complaints. He had simply presented the facts. The truth was his weapon, and it had struck a mortal blow. Finally, with the same deliberate grace, he snapped the wallet shut and returned it to his bag. He then raised his phone again, the boarding pass still glowing on the screen, and extended it to Isabel. "Seat 2A," he said, his voice now gentle, as if speaking to her after a sudden shock. Numbly, Isabel reached out and scanned the code. The machine chirped its affirmative beep, a ridiculously mundane sound in the wake of such a colossal human implosion. The small gate in front of her clicked open. "Enjoy your flight, Captain Vance," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Elias gave her a small, reassuring nod. He did not look at Richard Sterling again. He had said everything that needed to be said. He picked up his bag, walked past the petrified captain as if he were a statue, and stepped onto the jet bridge. The moment he was out of sight, a collective exhale seemed to ripple through the crowd at the gate. Whispers erupted immediately. The woman with the phone quickly stopped recording and began furiously typing. Captain Sterling remained frozen in place for another few seconds, his mind struggling to process the sheer magnitude of his miscalculation. He had not just made a mistake. He had committed a profound act of professional and personal self-destruction, and the entire world was about to see it. The interior of the 737 was cool and quiet, the typical pre-flight calm before the storm of passengers arrived. As Elias stepped through the doorway, the lead flight attendant, Anna Rodriguez, greeted him with a practiced smile. "Welcome aboard, sir." Her smile faltered slightly as she saw his face. She had heard the commotion from the gate, the sudden silence, and then the captain's raised voice. She saw the ironclad composure on Elias's face, but his eyes held a deep, cold fire. "Good morning," Elias replied, his voice even. "Just heading to 2A." He stowed his messenger bag in the overhead bin and settled into the plush leather of the first-class window seat. He was a pilot. He knew the choreography of a flight. He knew that in a few minutes Captain Sterling would have to walk past him to get to the cockpit. He knew the first officer who he'd seen at the jet bridge door would follow. The aircraft, usually a place of comfort and command for him, now felt like a cage. He stared out the window at the ground crew, moving with purpose on the tarmac below, trying to focus on the technical details, the familiar dance of aviation. But his mind was a maelstrom. The public humiliation burned. It wasn't just the accusation, it was the casual, effortless way Sterling had tried to erase him, to render him invisible and illegitimate in a world he had worked twice as hard to succeed in. A few moments later, the remaining first-class passengers began to file in their eyes, darting toward him with a mixture of sympathy and morbid curiosity. He ignored them, keeping his gaze fixed outside. Then came the footsteps he was expecting. Heavy, leaden. Captain Sterling appeared in the aisle, his face still ashen. He had to walk directly past seat 2A. As he drew level, he stopped. He couldn't not. The silence from the cockpit door to seat 2A was a chasm that had to be acknowledged. "Look," Sterling began, his voice a hoarse, unfamiliar croak. He seemed to shrink in his own uniform. Elias slowly turned his head from the window and met Sterling's gaze. He didn't say a word. He simply looked at him, his expression a blank wall of professionalism. There was no anger, no accusation, just an impenetrable calm that was more unnerving than any outburst would have been. Sterling faltered. What could he say? "I'm sorry I'm a bigot. I'm sorry I assumed you were a criminal because you're black." The inadequacy of any possible apology hung in the air between them. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Defeated, he turned, and all but fled into the sanctuary of the cockpit, closing the door with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot. First Officer Ben Carter was next. As he passed, he paused briefly, his eyes meeting Elias's. Ben gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of apology, of solidarity, of profound embarrassment for his superior's conduct. Elias acknowledged it with a slight dip of his own head. In that brief, silent exchange, a professional understanding passed between them. Ben Carter knew. Inside the cockpit, the tension was thick enough to bend light. Sterling slumped into the left-hand seat, his hands trembling slightly as he went through the pre-flight checklist. Ben took the right seat and began his own flow, the familiar sequence of checks and balances that started every flight. Pre-flight checklist. Ben said, his voice clipped and professional, trying to force a return to normalcy. Sterling grunted in response. He fumbled with a switch, his movements clumsy. He was a man utterly undone. The precision and confidence that were the hallmarks of a good pilot had evaporated. "You think he's going to file a report?" Sterling finally muttered, his voice low and laced with a new, unfamiliar note of fear. "I would," Ben replied honestly, not looking at him, his focus on the instrument panel. "I'd file a report with the company, the FAA, and the pilots' union." "It was a misunderstanding," Sterling insisted, his voice pleading, trying to rewrite the narrative in his own head. "The lighting was bad. He wasn't in uniform. I was just trying to maintain order during boarding." Ben finally turned to look at him, his expression incredulous. "Rick, you didn't ask to see his ticket. You told him he didn't belong. You publicly accused him of trying to sneak onto the plane. There were 50 people who saw it, and at least one of them was filming." The color drained further from Sterling's face. The phone. He hadn't thought about that. The idea of his face, his words being broadcast for the world to see, sent a wave of nausea through him. "He's a 787 captain, Rick." Ben continued, his voice quiet but firm. "He flies international. He's not some new hire. You didn't just insult a passenger, you insulted a senior colleague. You embarrassed the entire airline." The weight of Ben's words settled on Sterling. For the rest of the flight, the cockpit was a tomb of simmering resentment and dread. Sterling flew the plane on autopilot, his inputs clumsy, his mind clearly elsewhere. His radio calls to air traffic control were terse, lacking their usual smooth cadence. Ben found himself subtly monitoring every action, double-checking every input, his own workload, doubled by his captain's incapacitating shame. Back in the cabin, Ana Rodriguez made a point of providing Elias with exceptional service. "Captain Vance," she said softly, leaning in after they reached cruising altitude. "Can I get you anything at all? A drink, a snack? Please let me know." She stressed his title, a small act of defiance and respect. "A ginger ale would be great, Anna." "Thank you," he replied, giving her a tired but grateful smile. He tried to watch a movie, but the words and images on the screen were just a blur. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Sterling's face, contorted with arrogant certainty. He felt the sting of the eyes of the crowd. The quiet dignity he had fought so hard to maintain felt like a fragile shield against a lifetime of such cuts, both large and small. The sky, his sanctuary, now felt heavy, pressing down on him with an unbearable weight. He wasn't just a passenger on Flight 1128. He was cargo, a problem in Seat 2A that had to be delivered to Denver, a living, breathing testament to the ugliness that had occurred at Gate B42. The descent into Denver was smooth, a stark contrast to the turbulence of the preceding hours. As the Boeing 737 touched down on the runway at Denver International Airport, A sense of finality settled over Elias. The flight was over, but the incident he knew was just beginning. As the plane taxied to the gate, a chorus of chimes filled the cabin as passengers switched their phones off airplane mode. Elias did the same, more out of habit than any desire to reconnect. His phone immediately began to buzz, vibrating violently in his hand with a cascade of notifications. Texts, missed calls, news alerts. His heart sank. It had already started. The first text was from Aliyah Elias. "Are you okay? I just saw a video. Call me now." He quickly swiped to his news app. The headlines were stark and sensational. Global Wings captain accosts black pilot in viral video. CNN. This isn't your flight. Airline investigates shocking incident of racial profiling. The New York Times. Flying while black pilot's humiliation at JFK sparks outrage. Mashable. He clicked on the first link. There it was. A shaky, vertically shot video already viewed over 2 million times. He saw himself standing calm and composed. He saw Captain Sterling, his face a mask of condescending authority. He heard the words again, amplified and broadcast to the entire world. "I'm the captain of this aircraft, and I'm telling you this isn't your flight." The video continued, capturing the moment he presented his credentials, the collective gasp from the onlookers, the utter devastating shock on Sterling's face. The anonymous woman who filmed it had become a citizen journalist, and her smartphone had become the instrument of a swift and brutal form of digital justice. The comment section was a torrent of outrage. Thousands of people from all walks of life condemned Sterling's actions. Pilots from other airlines weighed in, expressing their disgust and offering solidarity to Elias. The hashtag Captain Vance was trending alongside Global Wings shame. The seatbelt sign pinged off. As he stood to retrieve his bag, his phone rang. The caller ID read, "Jonathan Harrington, VP Flight Operations, Global Wings HQ." Elias took a deep breath and answered. "Vance. Captain Vance, this is Jonathan Harrington. Elias, I am calling to offer my most profound and sincere apology on behalf of the entire airline for what you experienced this morning." The voice on the other end was strained, heavy with the weight of a corporate crisis. "I have seen the video. There are no words. It's inexcusable." "Thank you, Mr. Harrington," Elias said, his voice level. "Captain Sterling and his first officer have been instructed to report directly to my office upon their return to JFK. They are being grounded effective immediately pending a full investigation." Harrington continued his words rapid fire. "We will be issuing a public statement within the hour. I want to assure you we are taking this with the utmost seriousness. Is there anything at all we can do for you right now?" "I'm fine, Jonathan. I'm just looking forward to seeing my family," Elias said. The corporate damage control machine was in full swing, but it all felt distant, surreal. "Of course. Please take your time. We will need to get a formal statement from you, but that can wait. Just... Again, Elias, I am so sorry." Elias disconnected the call as he stepped into the jet bridge. He was one of the first passengers off, but the news had already permeated the cabin. He could feel the stares on his back, no longer of morbid curiosity, but of awe and sympathy. He had become a symbol. Meanwhile, back in the cockpit of Flight 1128, Captain Sterling's world was collapsing in on him. His own phone was exploding with calls from his union representative and messages from horrified colleagues. The company-issued tablet pinged with an official email from Harrington's office, urgent grounding notification, and summons to HQ. Ben Carter sat silently in the right seat, reading the same email. He looked over at the man who, just a few hours ago, had been the untouchable commander of the aircraft. Now Sterling looked like a ghost, his face pale, his hands shaking. The 4 stripes on his uniform, once a source of immense pride, now seemed to mock him. "They grounded me," Sterling whispered, his voice cracking. "After 35 years, they grounded me over a simple mistake." "It wasn't a simple mistake, Rick," Ben said, his patience finally snapping. "You know exactly what it was, and now so does the rest of the world." Sterling had no reply. He had been tried and convicted in the court of public opinion before the engines had even cooled. The digital tempest he had unleashed with a few prejudiced words was now a full-blown hurricane, and it was tearing his life apart. When Elias finally emerged into the main terminal, he saw his father waiting for him just beyond the security checkpoint. A tall, proud man with a warm smile, Robert Vance's face was etched with concern. He enveloped his son in a powerful hug. "I saw the news," Robert said, his voice rumbling with emotion. "Are you all right, son?" Elias leaned into his father's embrace, the rigid control he had maintained for hours finally beginning to crack. "I am now," he murmured. "I am now." He was safe with his family. But the storm was far from over. The initial shockwave had passed, but now came the aftershocks, the corporate investigation, the media frenzy, and the long, slow grind of consequences that were about to rain down on Captain Richard Sterling with the force of a biblical flood. The fallout for Global Wings Air was immediate and severe. Their stock price dipped. Rival airlines subtly capitalized on the PR nightmare with ad campaigns highlighting their own commitment to diversity. Talk show hosts and news pundits dissected the viral video frame by frame. The incident became a national conversation about implicit bias and racial profiling in places where it should never exist. Jonathan Harrington, the VP of Flight Operations, was in the unenviable position of trying to pilot the company through the storm. His first order of business was the internal investigation. He interviewed Elias Vance via video conference. Elias was factual, calm, and devastatingly precise. He recounted the events without embellishment or overt anger, which made his testimony all the more powerful. He wasn't a man seeking revenge. He was a professional, detailing a serious breach of conduct. Next came First Officer Ben Carter. In the sterile environment of a corporate boardroom at JFK, Ben gave a statement that sealed his captain's fate. He corroborated every detail of Elias's account. He described Sterling's condescending tone, his physical blocking of the aisle, and his refusal to even look at the boarding pass. Crucially, he also described Sterling's behavior in the cockpit after the incident, the lack of remorse, the blaming of Elias, the pathetic attempts to frame it as a misunderstanding. Ben's testimony painted a picture not of a simple mistake, but of a man with a deep-seated toxic prejudice. Finally, it was Richard Sterling's turn. He arrived at the hearing looking haggard and defeated. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by a desperate defensive energy. He stuck to his story. It was a misunderstanding. He was concerned about security. He was just doing his job. But Harrington was prepared. This is where the first brutal gear of karma began to grind. "Mr. Sterling," Harrington began, his voice cold. "In digging through your record, we found a pattern. This isn't the first time your concern for order has been questioned." He slid a file across the polished mahogany table. 6 years ago, a complaint from a junior female first officer, Jessica Riley. She alleged you created a hostile work environment, constantly questioning her abilities, making comments about women being too emotional for the flight deck. The complaint was dismissed due to lack of evidence. "Do you recall?" Sterling paled. "That was just cockpit banter. She was too sensitive." 2 years ago, Harrington continued, sliding another paper forward. A formal grievance from a gate agent in Miami, Ricardo Diaz. He stated you berated him in front of passengers for a minor delay that was due to weather. You allegedly told him to speak English, even though he was speaking perfect unaccented English. This was settled informally. Do you recall? He was incompetent, Sterling sputtered. The investigation had unearthed a history of microaggressions and abuses of power, all previously dismissed as isolated incidents or personality clashes. But now seen through the lens of the viral video, they formed a clear, damning mosaic of a man who used his authority to bully and belittle anyone he deemed other. But the true hard karma was yet to come. It arrived not from inside Global Wings, but from the outside. Jessica Riley, the female pilot Sterling had pushed out 6 years prior, was no longer a junior first officer. After leaving Global Wings disillusioned and frustrated, she had taken a different path. She had joined the Federal Aviation Administration. She was now an aviation safety inspector in the FAA's Standards Division, a powerful regulatory position. When she saw the video of Elias Vance, she felt a sickening sense of déjà vu. She saw the same arrogance, the same abuse of power that had nearly destroyed her own career. But this time there was irrefutable proof. She pulled her old complaint file from her personal records. She cross-referenced it with the public details of the new incident. Then she filed an official FAA inquiry into Captain Richard Sterling's fitness to hold an airline transport pilot license, citing a pattern of behavior inconsistent with the judgment and character required of a pilot in command under federal aviation regulations. This was the kill shot. An internal airline investigation could cost a pilot his job. An FAA investigation could cost him his license, his pension, and his entire career. It was the aviation equivalent of a death sentence. The FAA had the power to ground him permanently across all airlines. The news hit Sterling like a physical blow. His union representative told him the odds were grim. The public visibility of the case meant the FAA would be mercilessly thorough. His 35-year career, his identity, everything he had built was turning to dust. The final twist of the knife came from an unexpected place. Sterling's personal life. He and his wife were in the process of being approved for an exclusive co-op apartment on Park Avenue, the culmination of his life's ambitions. The co-op board, a notoriously selective group, got wind of the scandal. They reviewed the video and the subsequent news coverage. His application was quietly and unanimously denied the rejection letter, citing a failure to meet the board's character standards. He had lost his job. He was about to lose his license. His reputation was in tatters. He was a pariah in the industry he once ruled. And now even the civilian world he aspired to join had slammed the door in his face. All because he couldn't stand the sight of a black man in first class. He had tried to tell Elias Vance, "This isn't your flight." Now the world, the FAA, his employer, and even his prospective neighbors were all telling him, "This is no longer your world." The engine of karma had not just ignited, it had reached maximum thrust. The seasons turned, and the fury of the digital firestorm that had engulfed Global Wings air subsided, leaving behind a changed landscape. The internet's outrage like a flash flood had receded, but the terrain it had carved through reputations and policies was permanently altered. The video of the confrontation at Gate B42 became a cautionary tale, a case study used in corporate training seminars on implicit bias across the country. For Richard Sterling, the consequences were not a singular dramatic explosion, but a slow, suffocating avalanche of his own making. The FAA's verdict was the final nail in the coffin of his career. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, its dry, bureaucratic language delivering a sentence of professional death, a demonstrated failure to exercise the judgment required, conduct unbecoming of an airman. His license was revoked. His wings were clipped forever. The termination from Global Wings was a mere formality after that. The pension he had worked 35 years to build was slashed a penalty for a dismissal rooted in gross misconduct. He tried to fight it, but his union, facing a PR nightmare and an ironclad case against him, offered only tepid support before quietly advising him to accept the terms. He sold the sprawling Connecticut home where he'd hosted parties, boasting of his seniority and international roots. The sale was rushed, the price depressed by the notoriety that now clung to his name like the smell of smoke. He retreated to a sterile beige condominium in a faceless development in southern Florida, a place where no one knew his name or the story behind the haunted, bitter look in his eyes. His final crushing humiliation came when he saw an in-flight magazine on a newsstand. On the cover was a feature on Global Wings' New Faces of Leadership. Prominently featured was a picture of Captain Elias Vance, looking poised and professional, under the headline, "Charting a New Course for Inclusion." Sterling threw the magazine in a trash can, the glossy paper a final infuriating testament to the world he had lost, and the man whose life he had inadvertently elevated while destroying his own. His karma was a quiet, lonely exile, a ground-level purgatory, with a view of the sky he could no longer touch. For Elias Vance, the path forward was far less clear. He had never asked to be a symbol, but the role had been thrust upon him. He returned to flying his JFK Heathrow route, seeking solace in the familiar rhythms of the cockpit. On his first flight back, his first officer, a sharp young woman named Amelia Chen, shook his hand firmly during the pre-flight briefing. "Captain," she said, her eyes meeting his with unwavering respect, "it's an honor to fly with you. What you did, it mattered to a lot of us." The entire cabin crew on that flight treated him with a quiet reverence that was both comforting and unsettling. He was no longer just their captain, he was the captain. The anonymity he had once taken for granted was gone. Walking through terminals, he was a celebrity. People would stop him, their phones held up discreetly, whispering to their companions. Most offered words of support. One day, a young black man in an airport operations uniform approached him, his expression one of awe. "Captain Vance, sir. I'm studying for my PPL. I saw what happened. You made me want to work even harder. You showed us all how it's done." The encounter warmed Elias, but it also underscored the weight of the mantle he now wore. For every supporter there was a resentful glance from an older white pilot who saw him not as a hero, but as the man who brought a firestorm down on one of their own. He was a lightning rod drawing both praise and contempt. It was during a layover in London that the call came from Jonathan Harrington, the VP of Flight Operations. The tone was markedly different from their previous, crisis-driven conversations. "Elias, we've been in a state of deep reflection here," Harrington said, his voice earnest. "We've rolled out new sensitivity training and it's a start. But frankly, it feels like putting a bandage on a broken bone. It's surface level. We need to change the culture, the very DNA of how we operate, who we hire and who we promote." "I agree," Elias said, his guard up. "But that's a monumental task." "It is, and it requires monumental leadership," Harrington replied. "That's why I'm calling. We're creating a new C-suite level position, reporting directly to the CEO. Vice President of Aviation Culture and Inclusion. This isn't an HR role, Elias. This is an operations role. It comes with oversight of pilot and cabin crew, hiring criteria, final say on training curriculum, and the authority to build a mentorship program from the ground up." Elias felt his breath catch. "And you're calling to get my recommendation for who should fill it?" "No," Harrington said, his voice firm. "I'm calling to offer you the job." The The silence stretched for a long moment. Elias stared out his hotel window at the grey London sky. "Jonathan," he said finally, his voice tight. "I'm a pilot. My office is at 38,000 feet. You're asking me to trade a yoke for a desk. I don't want to be a poster boy for your corporate mea culpa." "I understand that," Harrington said, his voice not faltering. "And if that's all this was, I wouldn't be asking. You wouldn't be a poster boy, Elias. You'd be the architect. You have the unshakable respect of the crews. You have the lived experience. You have the moral authority that no one else in this company possesses. You showed more grace and command under fire at that gate than most pilots show in a real emergency. We need that. Not just your story, but your character, your leadership." The offer left Elias reeling. That night he called Alia. He laid it all out, the title, the authority, and his own profound hesitation. "It feels like giving up," he confessed, pacing the floor of his hotel room. "Everything I've worked for my entire life was to get that fourth stripe to command that aircraft. If I take this, I'm grounding myself." Voluntarily. Alia was quiet for a moment, her wisdom traveling across the Atlantic. "Or," she said softly, "you're just changing what kind of aircraft you're flying. You've mastered the 787. Maybe this is a different machine, one that carries 30,000 employees instead of 300 passengers. Its controls are policies, and people not a yoke and rudder. The destination isn't Heathrow. It's a better, more decent workplace. It isn't giving up, Elias. It might be the most important command you ever take." His conversation with his father a day later solidified it. Robert Vance, a man who had broken his own barriers in the engineering world a generation earlier, was pragmatic. "Son, some men are destined to open a door. Others are called to hold it open for those who come after. You kicked that door down without even trying. Now they're asking you to stand at the threshold and wave others through. There's no shame in that. There is honor in it." He wrestled with the decision for another week, but his family's words echoed in his mind. He could continue to be an exemplary pilot, a role model by performance. Or he could step into a role where he could systemically dismantle the prejudices that created men like Richard Sterling. His last flight was bittersweet. As he guided the Dreamliner off the runway at JFK, climbing through the clouds into the brilliant, impossibly blue stratosphere, he felt a profound sense of both loss and purpose. He savored every moment, the smooth hum of the Rolls-Royce engines, the quiet camaraderie with his co-pilot, the breathtaking view of the Earth's curvature. When they landed at Heathrow, the cabin crew presented him with a framed photo of the aircraft signed by all of them, with messages of thanks and good luck. He walked off the plane, not as a pilot heading for a layover, but as an executive with a new mission. 1 year later, Elias stood on a brightly lit stage, not in a uniform, but in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. The auditorium was filled with the newest class of Global Wings pilots. Looking out at the sea of eager faces, a diverse assembly of men and women from every conceivable background, he saw the future he had chosen to build. "Good morning," he began, his voice, calm and resonant, filling the large hall. "A little over a year ago, I was told by another captain that a flight I was about to board wasn't mine. In a way, he was right. My flight, my true flight path, turned out to be something different. It led me here to you." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Your uniform and the stripes you will earn to put on it are symbols of incredible privilege and immense responsibility. They signify mastery of a machine, of weather, of procedure. But they must also signify a mastery of character. The authority vested in you is not a weapon to be used against others, but a tool to lift them up. It's not about who you can keep out of the cockpit or first class or this company. It's about who you can bring in, who you can mentor, and whose journey you can make a little bit smoother. He looked across the room, making eye contact with the young, hopeful aviators. My team and I have spent the last year rebuilding our mentorship programs and rewriting our hiring standards to look for not just skill, but for empathy and integrity. We are building a culture where dignity is as vital as altitude. Because the sky doesn't care what you look like, where you come from, or who you love. It demands only one thing: excellence. And our job together is to ensure that everyone who has that excellence has a clear runway to take off. Welcome to Global Wings. Now let's go fly. As applause filled the auditorium, Elias felt no regret. He had traded his seat in the cockpit for a seat at the table where the maps were drawn. He was no longer just flying a plane. He was navigating the soul of an airline, charting a course toward a new and much brighter horizon. That single defining moment at Gate B42 became a catalyst for profound change, proving that one person's dignity, when asserted against injustice, can ripple outwards with incredible force. Captain Vance's story is a powerful reminder that prejudice often withers in the face of undeniable truth and professionalism. The karma that found Captain Sterling wasn't mystical. It was the direct, real-world consequence of his own actions, a bill that finally came due. This story highlights the ongoing struggle for equality in every profession and the courage it takes to confront bias head-on. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button to show your support, share it with others who need to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more true stories of justice and accountability. What are your thoughts on how this situation was handled? Let us know in the comments below.